On Tech News Today, the Chinese government is tired of stealing Windows, so now they're building their own operating system. Plus, Sony's PlayStation network is taken down in a DDoS attack accompanied by a bomb threat, and LG plans to release a smartwatch that, unlike the Moto 360, is actually round. All that and more coming up right now.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Tech News Today is provided by CashFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Tech News Today for Monday, August 25th, 2014. This episode is brought to you by Gazelle, the fast and simple way to sell your used gadgets. Find out what your used iPhone, iPad, and other Apple products are worth at Gazelle.com. Tech News Today is a show where we talk about the tech news with the journalists who report it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mike Elgan, and with me is Jason Howell, the single parent over the weekend.
Oh, man.
Congratulations for getting through that.
Yeah, it's not the first time, but, you know, man, being home alone with one kid versus two kids, and when they're both that young, it's, man. I was happy to come into work, especially today. It's like, I need to step away. I need to disconnect from home right now.
Somehow taking care of two kids is more than twice as hard as taking care of the
it's way more. Yeah, it's hard.
All right, so they go in different directions, and there's only one of you. What are you going to do? And also with us today is our guest co-anchor, Tim Stevens. Welcome to you, Tim Stevens, editor-at-large of CNET.
Good morning / afternoon. How are you?
Very well, thanks. You rocked it on Twit yesterday. That was a great show.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I confess I did a lot of listening in the early parts when Scoble was talking about Facebook. But yeah, some interesting news that we got into. And we did talk about Facebook an awful lot.
Scoble was talking and you couldn't get a word in edgewise? I find that hard to believe.
Shocker.
But he's got an interesting point. Not to, I mean, you guys talked about it for a long time, but he's got some interesting ideas about Facebook. He's literally the only person in the world who uses Facebook the way he uses Facebook. He does some crazy stuff, like he really uses it to put tech data and industry information on his main feed, and then he silences his family feed and goes and explicitly goes and looks at his family feed when he wants to. And it's really kind of interesting. He has a hard time convincing anyone that this is the way that anybody ought to do it or could do it or should do it or whatever. But it is interesting, and it's nice to see somebody doing, really, really using a social network and trying to push it to its limits rather than just going there and passively watching the cat videos go by.
Yeah, it was quite interesting to see what you can get out of Facebook with the right curation, but the amount of effort that it seems that would be required to get that out of Facebook just seemed like a lot of work. For me, Facebook is much more of a personal kind of keeping up with friends and family kind of thing. I do get some news through there. But for me, definitely, I turn to Twitter or to Google Plus when I'm looking to do news or, discussions about news, that kind of thing for me. But that's just how I use it. So it was interesting to see his usage pattern for sure, especially given that he's, one of the most powerful social media people out there for sure.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump into the news. The Chinese government-owned Xinhua news agency said that China may ship its own operating system by October. The government may want Chinese independence from American OS makers after public conflict with all of them, Microsoft, Apple, and Google, and also as a possible reaction to leaks by Edward Snowden about the scale and reach of NSA surveillance. Now, Tim Stevens, this is something they've tried before and failed at before. They've come out with their own official government operating system, and they really couldn't get anybody else to use it, and that is really the key. They're promising app stores and a mobile version and all these things, but, how do you get the public to get off their addictions to iOS, Windows, and Android and embrace an official government operating system?
Yeah, it's getting easier. 5 years ago, it would have been absolutely impossible to imagine kind of getting away from a proper major desktop operating system. But now with so many tools and so many services available online, you can sort of start to step away from your reliance on these major operating systems. But still, it's a huge ask. And, of course, if it's the government, they can do some things in terms of incentives and maybe even mandates at some point to make these things go through. But to have this sort of thing targeted as a consumer option, especially in a very tech-crazed country like China certainly is, it's hard to imagine them having much success in that regard. I can understand the concern, absolutely, with all of the disclosures from Snowden and from elsewhere. And also, they've got a lot of concerns about XP going away, although they do still allow Windows 7 sales, which is interesting. So that's got some life left in it. But Windows 8 is banned, and, presumably Windows 9 or whatever we learn about here in the not-too-distant future will be similarly restricted. So, they've got definitely a big challenge ahead of them. And I definitely think it's going to be a tough road ahead for them to try to get anything that's going going to be adopted on any sort of scale.
Absolutely true. And, I wonder about how far they're going to take it. I mean, they've got this a history of saying that they're really trying to do one thing, but they instead are doing that thing plus something else. Let me give you an example. Every once in a while, they have these big crackdowns on social media where they really boost their censorship and they arrest some people and they do various things. And they always portray these crackdowns as they're cracking down on pornography, rumor mongering, etc. It's the etc. that seems to be the main point, which is cracking down on dissidents, people who are counter to the government, the Falun Gong, the pro-Tibetan independence citizens, the Muslims in the West who are always they're having trouble with, and so you have a similar thing with the operating system. Sometimes I wonder whether the whole trumped-up fear-mongering about the NSA and also about perceived abuses by Microsoft and Apple and so on are not really an attempt to build an operating system that they themselves can use to spy on their own people, to prevent people from whispering secretly beyond the reach of the government. So just as an example of some of the ways that they've trumped this up, in May, the Chinese government banned the use of Windows 8 by government procurement. And Microsoft is also currently under investigation for antitrust violations. And that was kind of a funny one because they said, yeah, okay, we acknowledge that most of the monopoly in China of Windows is stolen, pirated copies, but that's a separate issue from the fact that it is a monopoly and therefore we're going to go after them for antitrust violations. Android, of course, dominates the mobile phone scene in China, absolutely dominates it. And Apple was recently accused of threatening national security because of the location feature in iOS. And this, again, all of this news originates on state-owned media. The biggest media in China is owned by the government, and the government is run by the Chinese Communist Party. And so it seems like they're already sort of setting the groundwork for a general opposition to American operating systems as potentially part of this push to embrace a homegrown one.
Yeah, and I'm curious what sort of reaction they're having on the home front of this sort of news. I mean, I wonder if consumers there actually are distrustful of these operating systems that are coming from American tech companies. Do they actually trust these operating systems less than they trust their own government at this point, or are they kind of seeing through this? I know that the Great Firewall certainly has not made any consumers very happy in terms of the government. Certainly, there are a lot of efforts to get around that, and certainly it's pretty easy to do so. I understand, but I wonder if any attempts, heavy-handed attempts to kind of force their own operating system onto mobile devices or onto desktop computers would be received in much the same way. I just don't think that they're really going to be winning that battle.
I have the feeling that the situation there is very much like the situation here, which is that, a tiny minority of geeks and intellectuals are really paying attention, really concerned about it. The vast majority of consumers just aren't really paying that much attention, are using whatever they want to use for whatever reasons they want to use it, and generally just kind of look the other way and stay focused on other things. But we'll keep an eye on this story and see if this operating system has any legs. Again, we're looking at this operating system to potentially hit as early as October, and with a mobile version coming significantly later. So I'm curious to see what it will be. It'll probably be Linux-based, I would guess. Again, just like their last one. And we'll see if they can dislodge Windows and Android. It's a tall order. Well, in just a minute, we're going to tell you about a PlayStation hack that came with a little difference that was somewhat disturbing. But first, I want to tell you about Gazelle. Gazelle wants to buy your used gadgets. And let me tell you something. It's coming. The new iPhone is coming. And when it hits, the old iPhones are going to plummet in value. If you've got an old iPhone, if you've got an old iPad, if you've got an old Android device, now is the time to go to Gazelle and find out what that device is worth, because I can pretty much assure you that in a few months, it is not going to be worth as much as it is now. Just go to gazelle.com. That's GAZELLE.com. Find your item, indicate the condition, and they will give you a price. Here's the good news. That price is locked in for a month. All right, so you want to go there and lock in a price no matter what you do. Lock in a price, because if the value declines significantly over the next few weeks as we get closer to the iPhone 6 launch, you'll still get the current price. And that is a wonderful feature. The offers are risk-free, and you get paid fast by PayPal or by check. Or if you want 5% extra, you can go with the Amazon gift card option. So find out what your device is worth. It's risk-free. They send you a box. You put the thing in the box, send it back. They send you the money. It's that simple, super simple, super easy. and now is the time to do it, because that, every time a new iPhone comes out, it completely changes the entire market for what everything is worth. So find out what your iPhone is worth. Take a minute, go to gazelle.com to find out. Sony's PlayStation Network was attacked over the weekend, and a top Sony executive was also the target of an airline bomb threat, possibly by the same people or person. The network wasn't brought down. The network, was brought down. The plane was not brought down. A distributed denial of service attack made the game network unavailable, and someone using the Twitter name Lizard Squad claimed responsibility for the attack and said that it was a protest against Sony not spending more money on the PlayStation Network. Is this, Tim Stevens, does this feel to you like it does to me, which is that it's this whole trolling sort of anonymous a-hole phenomenon just keeps, they keep turning it up? Or is this something entirely different? Is this regular hacking? What do you think about this attack?
It's still pretty early days, so we don't have any strong indication or strong ties between the hacking and the bomb threat. I mean, it certainly on the outside looks like they are related, and so that's definitely taking a really bad step in the wrong direction. A denial of service attack is annoying to these companies, but something that they're pretty well prepared to handle. But calling it a bomb threat and really putting the lives of people not necessarily in danger, but certainly giving them a very bad day, to say the least, is definitely taking things a step too far, and certainly is going to be raising your awareness on the FBI's list quite a bit higher than it would have been otherwise with just a denial of service attack. Yeah, I feel like this is obviously any of this stuff is ugly and unfortunate. This is definitely a step in the wrong direction, but you can also see some of what they're getting at in terms of concerns about what Sony's been up to with the PSN. I mean, there was that huge hack, of course. That was quite a while ago now, about 3 years ago. But certainly, we haven't really seen any major steps forward in terms of authentication or security from Sony since then. There's no option for, say, two-factor authentication through the PSN or anything like that. If you really are concerned about security, things aren't really much better perhaps than they were before. So you can sort of see that, but this is really not the way to fix things.
Absolutely not. And I think that to some extent, I think it might be fair, or it might not be fair, I'm not quite sure, to lay some blame at the feet of Twitter. This account, this Lizard Squad account, despite the bomb threats, despite the claims of hacking, is still up and running. 37,000 followers. And, it reminds me of the fact that Twitter just doesn't seem to respond very well or have adequate systems for preventing or shutting down or quickly terminating accounts that do this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's definitely very disconcerting to me as well. I mean, we've certainly seen a lot of cases where very bad trolls, and a lot of that take a long time to get shut down. This is obviously the next level of trolling, but certainly they need to be shut down, and hopefully, the necessary information is being handed over to authorities to identify whoever is making these threats, and whether or not they're connected to the hacking. At that point, that's the kind of a minor thing compared to calling it a bomb threat on an airline in flight and having it actually successfully diverted. It's kind of scary stuff.
Absolutely. Well, LG plans to release a round smartwatch next week. The company is currently one of only 2 Android Wear smartwatch makers with products actually shipping. Samsung is the other one. Joining us to talk about the new LG watch is Brad Molen, who writes for Engadget. Welcome to you, Brad.
Happy Monday, everybody.
Thank you so much. Now, can you tell us more about this watch and how we know it's going to be announced?
Yes. So LG actually had a teaser. It was on YouTube, and this is on their global channel. Basically, the teaser is a 30-second video that shows that, hey, LG is coming, and it's going to be coming out with this round smartwatch. Now, they came out, like you said, with a square smartwatch back at the I/O Developer Conference in June. So it's only been a couple months. So this is kind of an interesting idea that LG wants to be able to compete with the Moto 360. Obviously, there's a lot of great fanfare that was involved with the Moto 360 when it first was announced. Whereas the LG with the Square it's a little bit more bland looking. So I think LG was really responding as quickly as it could to the needs of the market.
Now, assuming that this is an Android Wear watch, how can they really differentiate themselves from the Moto 360? Obviously, product aesthetics and hardware design, is there really anything that they can do beyond that at this point?
There is one way that they can differentiate from what I can tell just by the teaser, and that is mainly through the bottom of the circle. Now, sounds kind of weird and like it's not a very big deal, but when the Moto 360 first was revealed and everybody got their hands on an early version of it, there was a little bar at the very bottom, so the display itself wasn't completely round. Now, LG is teasing that it's going to fill that gap down at the bottom, so that way it has a perfectly round display. So this is one way. It seems like it's such a small thing, but I think in terms of the overall user experience, this is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, and LG seemed to be kind of rubbing their nose in it, which is really kind of interesting. The video actually just shows, makes a big deal out of this, pushing the edges of this thing out to a circle, and then it goes to the bottom, and it's basically just hitting you over the head with, this is really round, not like, the leading brand and so on. So what is it about round watches? Why do they seem so much better, and why do they seem so much harder? I mean, I get the feeling after reading all of what we know about this that it's likely that LG developed the square and the round watches at the same time, but round watches seem to take longer to develop. You see, the Moto 360 still isn't out, and so maybe you put the square one out there just as sort of a stopgap because it wanted to be one of the early movers or something like that. But what is it about round watches that are so compelling, do you think?
Well, I first agree that the Square Watch was more of a stopgap. It was a way for them to just get it out there in the market, get some early feedback, and be able to squash a bunch of bugs that they were experiencing early on, as we saw initially with the issue with the charger ports, the corrosion. So that's certainly an issue that they want to take care of, so that way when the round watch comes out, they don't have that problem, and they are able to compete hand in hand with the Moto 360. Now, the reason why I think the round display is so much more compelling is because this is more like a regular watch. I think a lot of people are still hesitant to really look into the idea of a smartwatch in general. Just because they're so used to having a really nice looking watch. I mean, you take a look at most people, it's a huge fashion accessory to them. It's not just a way to tell the time. And so if a smartwatch is going to become big, it also needs to be able to do the same thing. It needs to be a fashion statement rather than just, hey, look at all the cool little apps that it can do. Hey, this gets my text messages. That's not going to fly for most people because they look at their phone as a way of doing exactly the same thing. So why do they need that on their wrist as well? So this is going to be a huge thing. If the Moto 360 and the LG watch both do really well, then we can see that this is certainly turning into a fashion accessory.
So, and in terms of that flat tire on the 360, do you have any indication of why that's actually there? Because Motorola actually made the Aura smartphone, which had a circular display, and it didn't have any flat tire or anything like that there. Do you have any idea why they need that on the watch but not on their earlier device?
That's a really good question. I'm not quite certain.
I might have the answer for that. So it was confirmed early on, I believe, when the G Watch and the Gear Live were shown off at I/O, that the 360 has an ambient light sensor. So it's possible that the the part down at the very bottom of the display is for that sensor, which is actually pretty important when you think about watches. And particularly my experience with the Gear Live is that having that one brightness that's all the time, it's either on or off. Obviously it can kind of dim when you're not using it, but it's bad for battery. When you're out in bright sunlight and you actually want a little bit more, you actually have to go in and manually do it. So having that ambient light sensor might actually be kind of the trade-off for that, right? Like if you're okay with having a Moto 360 that adjusts depending on how bright it is outside, and that's incredibly useful, then maybe you have to be okay with that little flat black part. But we also don't know if the LG round watch is going to have an ambient light sensor, and if it does, where's it hidden? Where is it? So.
Yeah, that's a good point. It might be hidden in a completely different spot, perhaps on the perimeter of the watch itself. Right. So, yeah, that's certainly a good theory, because I don't see any other reason. There's nothing software-wise that would be causing it to be an issue, especially if LG is able to do it.
Now, Brad, you wrote that the watch will be called the LG G The LG G Watch R. And that can't possibly be the name. I mean, that's ridiculous. I mean, when this thing first came out, Jason was calling it the Gwatch. Maybe it should be called the Grotch.
I don't know if I like where this is going.
This definitely took an interesting turn. So, Grotch aside, I think that they are trying to emphasize the fact that it's a round device. The R stands for round. At least that's my theory. And I also believe that they don't want to just call it the G Watch 2 because that way LG would be admitting that the first one just wasn't very good and they're just trying to get this one out to replace it. My theory is that they're not actually trying to replace the first watch, but instead complementing it.
Okay. And the Moto 360 has a button on the side. And for a while, we wondered what that was for, but then we learned that it's for turning it on and off and things like that. And this one has a button on the side. I have the feeling that a round watch without a button just looks weird, and they want it to look like a real. And so they dummy up some phony baloney functionality for it. But do you know what the button for this watch is all about?
Nothing confirmed at this point, but I also have the feeling that it's doing exactly the same thing as the Moto 360. And honestly, I'm okay with it because when you play with the original G Watch, the issue with it is if you want to do any sort of resets, if you want to power it on and off, then it's a bit more cumbersome process than it really should be. So having the button on the side not only adds this physical element that most people are familiar with on their regular watches, but it also adds that crucial functionality. It may not be a lot of functionality, but it's also essential.
Is there any hope that the Type R watch will have better battery life than the earlier G Watch that we saw?
It absolutely should. The issue that I see with it, though, is it's only been a couple months. So what are they able to do, both in terms of the hardware and software optimization during that 2 months that will ultimately make a huge difference in battery life? I do have my my doubts on that.
Brad Molen writes at Engadget.com, and you can follow him on Twitter at PhoneWisdom. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brad Molen.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Thanks. Well, Amazon plans to become an online advertising company to compete against Google in that space. The Wall Street Journal reported Friday that Amazon is building its own software platform that will serve up contextual advertising based on personal data harvested from Amazon.com customers and Kindle and Fire tablet and phone users. Tim Stevens, kind of inevitable because Amazon is one of those hyper-aggressive companies that wants to get into every business where the money is, and they certainly have a lot of data.
Yeah, they certainly do, and this is definitely a great place to really leverage that data. If they know your shopping habits, if they know what you're subscribed to when it comes to groceries even, if they know what's in your wish list. Now, of course, they're also going to be able to track what sort of sites you're visiting if they start to embed these ads into those sites. That gives Amazon more power when it comes to making recommendations for you, and it definitely gives them another potentially very lucrative advertising stream. So, yeah, for them, it's a win-win, and certainly it should be the kind of thing that'll be easy for a lot of website managers to set up, I think, as well. So I think it'll be probably quite successful for them.
Yeah, and they also have a sort of a Square-like reader that they've introduced for brick-and-mortar stores, and I imagine that will be a place where they can harvest data as well. So they're going to be getting, it's kind of the Facebook model and the Google model, harvest data anywhere you can and then monetize the heck out of it, because that's really the future of advertising, clearly. And so we'll see how they do with that. And, again, Google's advertising business is a $50 billion a year business, and they pretty much own the space for the most part. Amazon has 250 million active users, and according to the Wall Street Journal, Amazon's offering will be pretty much like Google's AdWords system. They're going to start it out with an in-house program, so presumably these ads will be served up on Amazon.com, and then eventually they'll roll it out more broadly. So kind of, and like I said earlier, kind of inevitable. Well, the U.S. Open tennis tournament starts today in New York, and the ball boys and ball girls will be sporting wearable technology courtesy of Ralph Lauren. The ball people have been outfitted with biometric data monitoring polo shirts that keep track of breathing, heart rate, stress, and other vital signs. The only question, Tim Stevens, is why? Why do you want to know if the ball boy is breathing?
Yeah, I think the obvious question is, why isn't this on the players? And obviously, because that would have been a lot more expensive, I think, for Ralph Lauren to get all the players to wear these things with a variety of garment deals. I think that would probably be impossible. You know, it is an interesting way to get this technology out in the public eye, and certainly you will be seeing a lot of these ball boys and ball girls running around and collecting balls. It's not the kind of information we probably want, but you know, it is an interesting approach to wearable technology in a way to embed it into clothes rather than into a device that you wear. Certainly something that Ralph Lauren would like, because the thing is, you would have to buy you know, multiple shirts, of course, with all this sensor technology built into it. And the one thing that I haven't been able to find out yet, maybe you have, is what they say these things are going to cost.
Yeah, exactly. It's they're not really shipping them as products yet, and it sounds like an early play by Ralph Lauren, who, you know, probably believes, and probably rightly, that the future of clothing is, you know, smart clothing. The problem I have with these kinds of things is that, you know, I love the idea of smart clothes, of wearable computing that is built into clothing. Unfortunately, this whole heart monitoring, you know, breathing monitoring thing, everything is going to monitor those things. Those biometrics are going to be gatherable through watches, through bracelets, through all these other kinds of things. And so it's really not that exciting to me. I think the real excitement with garments is to integrate electronics that help you wash them and so on, and, you know, sort of monitor the temperature or whatever it is. I mean, something more interesting than just, you know, the ball boy is breathing, so everything is fine kind of thing. And if there's a glitch, they, you know, maybe the announcers are going to say, well, we just lost a ball boy. I stopped breathing 30 seconds ago, but fortunately we have some more ball boys, so don't worry. That sort of thing. But I don't know. It's at this point it feels like a bit of a publicity stunt, and I think that the athletic gear garment manufacturers are the ones who really need to be pioneering this sort of thing, not the guy who makes polo shirts. So we'll see how that goes. Well, the Royal Caribbean Cruise Line unveiled the details of their new smart ship, which is called Quantum of the Seas. The ship has virtual balconies, which we told you about earlier this year. These are for the cheap rooms that have no view, and the windows are simulated with 80-inch video screens showing what they would see if they had a window. Plus, the ships have a bionic bar where you can order your drink with a tablet, and then it's mixed by a robot. That's actually a good reason to take one of these cruise ships. And the ship uses RFID wristbands to rapidly process you on and off the ship, and they have Xbox Live stations with streaming content and video chat capability. The ship's maiden voyage is scheduled in November from New York to China. Once again, you know, I hate to sound like a curmudgeon and a skeptic, Tim Stevens, but whenever they get into this kind of high-tech stuff in hospitality, it makes me think they're going down the wrong path. When you go on a cruise ship, you want a real bartender. You know, you don't want just like some machine walk up to essentially a fancy vending machine to get your drink. Or would you want to go on a ship where everything's mechanized?
I mean, it depends. If there are robots delivering you meals, you know, on the deck next to the pool, that kind of thing, and, you know, finding you and giving you everything that you want without having to chase somebody down, you know, that may be a cool thing. But you know, I'm kind of mixed feelings when it comes to replacing windows with displays or having a display instead of a window. Obviously, you can't open a TV and get a breath of fresh air. But then again, nobody can throw you out through a TV, which would mean cruise ship murder mysteries would be a lot shorter. So, you know, I'm of mixed thoughts there. But definitely, I think I would still prefer a real window if possible.
I think that, you know, they should have robots that hunt for pathogens in the cafeteria to make sure that everybody doesn't get sick. That would be a good place to start with technology.
And that would actually be addressing some real problems that people really have with cruise ships.
Exactly. Well, our TNT fan of the day is George Cozy from the Netherlands, who posted this picture on Google+. In fact, this picture is the one that started the whole How Do You Watch TNT craze. In case you're wondering, he's drinking a Westmalle Trappist Triple, which is an excellent Belgian beer.
That's a good meal right there. I'd eat that.
Look at that. Look at that. That looks like tortellini with some sort of vegetable material and fried breaded what is that? Eggplant. See,
whatever it is, it looks good.
We have some.
Delicious.
We have our audience really knows how to eat and drink. All right. Well, that's just excellent. Well, how do you watch or listen to TNT? Just take a picture of your setup, post it on Google+, Twitter, or Facebook, and use the hashtag How Do You Watch TNT, and we will find it. You can also search for How Do You Watch TNT, and you can see them all for yourself. No waiting. And that is the tech news today. Tim Stevens, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, where can people follow your work, and what are you working on these days?
They can find me at cnet.com, of course. And this summer, I've been covering the Google Lunar X Prize. A bunch of teams are competing in a race to get to the moon. And this summer, a lot of those teams are doing some interesting testing to basically make sure that they're ready for the launch next year. Recently, I went to Bremen to check out a team called Part-Time Scientists in a simulated lunar environment to make sure the cameras are working okay. So there'll be a feature on that on CNET later this week.
Pretty much there isn't a fast vehicle that you don't like. I understand.
That's fair. That's absolutely fair.
Tim Stevens, editor-at-large, always on a fast vehicle. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thanks so much for having me.
We'll be following your work very closely. Thank you. Well, you can subscribe to Tech News Today on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, Feedly, Yahoo RSS. So many options. You can choose your favorite way at twit.tv/TNT. Follow us on Twitter at Tech News Today TV. And join our Google Plus community. It's an awesome community. We'd love to have you there. Just search Google Plus for Tech News Today. And send us your thoughts and opinions. Send email to tnt@twit.tv or leave voicemail at 260-TNT-SHOW. And don't miss our evening newscast, Tech News Tonight, at 4 p.m. Pacific tonight and every weeknight right here on the Twit Network. My name's Mike Elgan. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.